Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Oro Muscles, and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Oro Muscles revolutionizes rehabilitation with real-time actionable insights into muscle activity with live biofeedback and instant analysis, which has made a huge impact in my work with athletes. For more on Oro, be sure to check out oromuscles.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. Joining me today on the podcast is Cara Brown. Cara and I are going to dive into her journey in skiing. We're also going to dive into some of the injuries that she faced along the way, including a very unique ACL injury and surgical process, I guess I'll say, that Cara underwent, one that I have never heard before. I'm not going to spoil it for you. You got to listen to the episode to get there, but it is something that I have never seen or heard of before. Cara is an incredible individual, and after we wrap up our discussion about her skiing career and the injuries that she faced during that time, we also talk about what she's doing right now in the BVIs and where the tag Cara the Skipper has come from. This is a great conversation with an incredible person doing so many amazing things in the space. I really appreciate Cara's time and love everything that she's doing, and I know you're going to love this episode just as much as I did. Enjoy. Cara, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, and I really appreciate your time. And I can't wait to dive into all the incredible things that you have done and all that you're continuing to do that way across a wide array of interests that way. For people who maybe don't know that much about you, or maybe this is the first time they've heard your name, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and kind of this life journey you've been on that way?
Yeah, thank you for having me. For those that don't know me, where did I start? I was born in London, but when I was 7, I moved to live in Italy. So I grew up in Italy, just north of Milan, in a place called Varese, which is near sort of Lake Como, Lake Garda, up in the lake area. So it's really beautiful. And my parents were always really keen skiers, so we used to go skiing on the weekends all the time. And they put me into race training, and it turns out I quite like that. So I started racing, I think, when I was 12, which was quite late, I guess. And yeah, just enjoyed it and kept going and finished school. And then so after school, I went straight into full-time racing. So that was from like 18 to 28. So for 10 years, it was like my full-time job was ski racing. And then after I decided to move on from ski racing, I was like, I want to come somewhere completely different. And I've had enough of the snow and the cold. And now I live in the British Virgin Islands, which is a tiny island group in the Caribbean. We're right next to the US Virgin Islands that maybe people have heard of, as in like a mile away from them. So it's like the closest British US line of border in the world. And then here I work for a charter company. And for the last few years I've been working as a skipper and a sailing instructor.
That's incredible. So we started in the snow and now we're all in on everything that has to do with sunshine, whether that's sailing or, serving as a skipper on a boat that way. That's incredible. And, it's interesting, again, to see that shift from snow to sunshine, if you will, that way. And obviously, you and I both know the ski racing world is very unique that way. As you mentioned, 12 was almost kind of like feeling late to start off
Yeah.
within it that way, but it's also a group that takes everything like very, very seriously. And I think a lot of people that aren't familiar with the space maybe don't appreciate just how serious ski racing is, up to the point where, you're waxing your skis day of race to try and get things as close to the temperature of the snow as possible. You're spending significant amount of money on boots and speed suits that really don't feel that good or comfortable. And, you have a tendency to lose some toenails and different crazy things just from the equipment that you're spending all this money on that way. Like, it is a very demanding sport that way. And obviously you're in the extreme temperatures as well. Yet it's a very enjoyable, fun sport. And there's just nothing else quite like it that way. I guess I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how you kind of fell into this world of ski racing that way. And then what kept you in it? What kept you kind of progressing and evolving through it over time?
I don't know well, I think actually I know what made me start to take ski racing a bit more seriously was when, my last few years of school, people were starting to talk about going to university. And then like I remember there were a lot of people in my school that were applying to go to like Oxford and Cambridge. And I wasn't particularly academic, but I was in a school that was quite academic. And I was just looking at all these people and I was like, I don't want to go to university. I don't want to study any of these things. So I actually did apply for university, and plan B was to go to Glasgow to study biology. But I decided to take a gap year, and I was like, let's just try ski racing full time for a gap year and see if, I improve at all. And then because I went from only skiing like on my weekends to skiing all the time, then my improvement was pretty drastic. And so after a year, I went back to Glasgow Uni and I said, hey, I want to take another gap year. I want to keep skiing. At that point, I was only on the Scottish national team because my parents are Scottish. I wasn't on the British national team at that point. I was like very much a very late bloomer in skiing. Like most people that are not on the national team by like, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, then people are like, oh, well, they're never going to make it in ski racing. And then, I went back to Glasgow and I said, I want another year. And they said, no, you either need to come to uni now or you need to cancel your place. And it was really cool. I spoke to my parents, and they, who both have like, they're both originally accountants and bankers. So like they did go to university, and they said, you can go to uni anytime, but you can only ski now. So you should go skiing now. I don't know if they then intended me to do another 10 years of it. But they were always super supportive through it. And they thought it was brilliant that I was away ski racing and traveling the world and doing that instead of just doing the like going to university to study a degree that I wasn't entirely convinced about. Yeah, so that's kind of what pushed me into it. Not, they didn't push me into it, but what motivated me to go into it was that I was like, okay, like my parents were a close-knit family. I'm an only child. They were like, they think I could do this. Then like, let's go for it.
And it sounds like it really set you up for such a adventurous kind of lifestyle that way, where you got to travel and see the world and do incredible things that way, and obviously meet a ton of people and just be active and really push yourself physically. And I really love that you chose the skiing over the university that way, because to your point, we only get one chance at this life that way. We might as well go all in, full send, or whatever the trendy term is nowadays that way, and just kind of put it all out on the table. I think life is too short for us to kind of go about wondering like, well, what if I did this, or what if I did that, or what if I actually pursued that? It's like, at the end of the day, you might as well go all in and see where life takes you. And I love that you were able to do that. And the other thing I want to mention too is, obviously you mentioned that, you were on the Scottish team for a while and other things that way. And I'm always a little bit confused by the UK myself, mainly because I've never lived there. I'm not too familiar with it that way. How many countries are within that country, and what does that look like from like a competition standpoint? Because I believe you compete for like your like homeland country, like Scotland or England, but then you could also compete for the UK itself, correct? Or how does this work?
Yeah. So I think, well, two things. I think we're all, as in we, the Brits, are all really confused about it too. And also like, I'm just going to like preface this by saying that like I didn't grow up in the UK, so I didn't do UK history. So this may be factually incorrect. But as far as I know, so you've got the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So that's why you end up with UK, Great Britain, and then you end up with England, Scotland, and Wales. But on a national level, so if we're competing in like the British Championships, or I mean, I guess for skiing, there's not very many events, but it's like the British Championships, the Scottish Championships. The Welsh do actually host the ski championships, or they did 15 years ago. I assume they still did. So when you're competing at those, they break up the podiums between Scotland, England, and Wales and Northern Ireland. And you have to, when you start racing, you have to be part of a ski club. And so if you pick a ski club that's in Scotland, you will ski for Scotland. And I think you do have to have like, I mean, I don't know what would happen if you were 100% English, born in England with two English parents, and then you decide to ski for a Scottish ski club. But no one ever does that. Everyone just picks the clubs that are in the part of the UK they're from. So on a national level, you ski for England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. But then when it comes to an international level, you're skiing for Great Britain. And then it's only when you're at the Olympics that it's called Team GB. They're the, I guess, like the governing body for Great Britain at the Olympics. So even like world championships and things, you're Great Britain, you're not Team GB. And then I have no idea though why in rugby they compete individually. I've no idea. Yeah.
That's a conversation for another day, for
Yeah.
sure. I want to hear a little more about what events you did within the ski racing kind of world that way, because obviously there's different events, slalom, GS, some people race moguls and so on that way. What really captivated you in that world that way? And what have been kind of some of the places that you've really enjoyed traveling to that way, like Swiss Alps or Colorado,
Yeah.
where all has skiing taken you?
So in alpine skiing, you've got, well, there's 5 different disciplines, but well, there's now 6, I guess. But there's 4 main ones, which are I'll list them from the turns getting like bigger, like the space between the gates getting bigger, and therefore the speed's usually getting higher as well. So slalom is, if you ever watch ski racing, that's when you've got a single pole, and as it's like lots of quick short turns, and people are like hitting them as they go down with their hands. And then you've got giant slalom, where instead of having a single pole, you've got 2 poles with like a flag between them and the red and blue gates. And the distances between those gates are probably sometimes between like 23 to 30 meters. I can't do feet, sorry. Grew up European. And then next up from that, you've got super giant slalom, which is a mixture of, it's giant slalom, but with more downhill speeds incorporated to it. So the distance between the gates is probably up to about 40 meters. And also your speeds are much higher. It might have jumps in it, not necessarily. And then finally, you've got downhill, which is the distances between the gates can be huge because it depends on what the terrain of the hill looks like. So it's really set to the hillside, and the speeds are the highest, the jumps are the biggest. And I was not a slalom skier at all. I was primarily a giant slalom and super G. But I did do, earlier in my career, I did a lot of downhill. But the issue with downhill is that because you can imagine you're running it on a slope that's like, so the courses can go, they're also the longest, they're probably like 1.5 to 2 minutes. Coming from a small nation, I would often only have one coach with me. And so the ability to train where I have a downhill slope available for me to train as one person is, one, extremely expensive, and also just not feasible because I can't have my coach go and set an entire downhill course for me. And then equally, for when you're doing the races, if you're a big national team, you've got 10 different coaches. So you can have someone in the start, someone in the finish, and then throughout the course on the way down, you have people, which is also for a safety thing. So they can give you feedback on how it's all running. Whereas if I just had one coach, it just didn't make it just didn't work. And I probably didn't have like the downhiller skills. So yeah, the giant slalom super G in the middle was kind of what I specialized in.
Yeah, that's incredible. And as you mentioned, you still hit some pretty insane speeds while doing those things. 50
Yeah.
to 60 miles an hour. I'd imagine in kilometers, that's probably 100 to 120 kilometers an hour, roughly ish.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. No,
mean, people drive those speeds. They don't usually go that speed on skis. It's incredible, the rush and adrenaline that you feel when you're doing some of these races that way. And there's nothing that beats the feel of a perfect run, in my opinion, that way. And obviously there's so many factors and variables that go into that, from, the snow conditions day of race to when you're actually racing. Are you the first one on the course? Are you the last one on the course? Because it has a tendency to evolve throughout the day that way. But obviously you have found so much success in that space, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you won 5 championships for ski racing.
Yeah, I think so. Five British championships. So we do at the British champs every year. There's like an overall title where they combine like throughout the week. Depending on how you place, you get like the same as World Cup, 100 points for the winner, 80 for second, 60 for third, and so on. And so they add up your points for the week. So yeah, I think that one I think I won it 5 times. They also do one where they do like the best male and female combined. So that one's called like the Victor Ladorum, and I always think that one's pretty cool. So obviously we're not directly competing against the guys, but they tally up the points. And I won that one quite a few times as well. That was always a cool one to win.
That's incredible. What do you feel like set you apart from others and helped lead to the success that you found within ski racing that way?
I think probably the biggest thing that was also like to my downfall was that I was a very consistent skier. So my sort of, we call it like, if you come out of a race, so if you crash or you ski out, you make a mistake, and you can't finish the course, that's called a DNF, a did not finish. And my DNF rate was tiny. Like I was like a 95% of the time finisher, which is great when you're doing events where you're trying to build up points. And, you know, if I'd ever got to the level where I was competing for a World Cup overall, if I could make it down every run and still be fast, that would have been amazing. But I think, so that's what helped. My consistency really got me through. But equally, there's always this bit, it's like, well, if you're finishing all the time, maybe you're not quite pushing it to the limit. And that's something that is probably true. But because in my head, I was like, well, if I don't finish, that's it. Like, that's a race wasted. You know, if I get down and I'm slow, then at least I know I'm slow, or I might be fast. But if I don't finish at all, then that's that. So that's probably one thing that it helped, but it definitely also, there were probably days where I should have been pushing a little harder. And if I didn't have that mentality of always wanting to make it to the finish line, then, you know, 50% of the time, maybe I wouldn't have made it, but the other 50%, I would have been a lot faster. But it's one of those, like, who knows, what ifs.
Yeah, no, definitely. I do really appreciate that kind of personal mantra, if you will, about finishing what you start, though, and always wanting to finish things, if you will. And I realize that, you know, in the world of skiing, injuries are rather common that way, especially of the knee. I know every year when I go skiing, I kind of feel it a little bit afterwards. It's like, oh yeah, this actually, like, it works things that I don't usually work, if you will. And
Yeah.
I realized that one of the most important things that sets people apart in rehab in particular, for injuries that way, is just being able to stay the course, be consistent, and finish the job that way. You know, I think it's difficult. It's a long road or a long course, if you will. But if you trust the process and you stay consistent and you finish what you start, it's very possible to get back to doing the things that you love to do, even at the level that you were at before, I would say the majority of the time. So I guess I'm interested to hear a little bit about your own kind of personal history and backstory, if you will, with any kind of injuries that kind of popped up along the way.
Yeah, I think so. When I was starting in ski racing, so like the first, like, I'm going to say the first 3, 4 years out of school, I was just consistently getting much, much better. And I really enjoyed going to the gym and doing fitness. So I was consistently very strong. And then I remember I had one season where I'd reached the point where I was really pushing the limit. And it was like it was in 2016. And I was starting to do well in Europa Cups, which is part of the pathway to go into World Cup, which is then obviously part of the pathway to go into the Olympics. And I remember I was training a place called Zinal in Switzerland, and we were training with the Swiss national team, and we had timing set up. So you don't always have timing set up in training, but if you can, it's great to have timing set up in training. And I remember my coaches, who actually was coaching me at the time, was Shemi Olcott, who's Britain's most successful female ski racer, and an amazing person, and has always been a great mentor to other women coming up in British skiing. And she was coaching me, and she said to me, she was like, look, Cara, just take the first run easy. And, you know, we're here all day. There's no need to stress just because you're skiing with like the Swiss World Cup team. And I'm looking at these other girls in the start, and I'm like, I'm not going to take it easy. I'm going to be so slow if I take it easy. So I definitely didn't take it easy. And I went off a jump a bit funny. And like, I went off a jump a bit far. And normally when you land on a jump, you want to land on a slope. You don't want to land on the flat. But I jumped so far that I landed on the flat and then just fully compressed. And I remember I smacked my head off my knee, and it like cut my forehead open, but I punched the ground, like not intentionally, but like when my hands went down, I punched the ground and I broke a bone in my hand. And that was like my first injury. It was the first time I'd ever had something happen to my body that I was like, all right, I probably shouldn't, like, I have to not ski with this. Having said that, I did only not ski for about 3 or 4 days. It was just before Christmas, actually. So it worked out quite nicely. But then I remember going to the hospital, and they said they were going to give me like a molded cast. And I went in with my ski pole, and I was like, this is what you need to mold it to, which luckily my hand needed to be like kind of in this position anyway. So it worked. But that was like my first injury, and then got over that. And then unfortunately had like a fantastic season, like my best season ever. And then right at the end of the season, I was skiing in Courchevel in France, which was a slope that I loved. And I was just skiing really well. And we were doing, all my races for the season were over. And there was a men's race going on that they needed 4 runners for, which is like when you send people down the course first to test the timing, to test the course is safe. And so I was 4 running for that. And it was just, I can't really remember what happened, but I had a big crash and I felt something in my knee go. And that was my first ACL. And that was the first time that I had a really big injury. And I think and so I had to go and have surgery. You have to have surgery for your ACL. And then I did a little bit of prehab. So in the UK, they recommend that you wait 3 weeks post injury to have surgery. So I did prehab for 3 weeks, had my surgery, and then I did rehab for 6 months afterwards. And the UK has this amazing rehab facility where only 3 athletes a week can get in. And you have a physio, strength and conditioning trainer, physiologist, a psychologist, sports masseuse, dietitian. You have a whole team for you, which maybe in most sports, like the bigger sports like rowing and athletics, maybe they have these all the time. But in ski racing, we don't have that. And so it was amazing. I spent a lot of time in that rehab facility. And because it was around the Rio Olympics, they weren't busy because all the athletes that were injured weren't saying anything because they wanted to go to Rio. And all the athletes that were injured had missed the Olympics. And so they were like, well, we're going on our summer holidays. We're not going to rehab. So I was in there for a long time by myself. But yeah, I think unfortunately for me, I always struggled to get past the mental hurdle of like, I was at my peak in skiing, or at the time I was at my peak and I was doing everything right. I was super strong. I was super fit, and this still happened. And, I came back and I was stronger than before because I had 6 months of just getting strong. But then I had like a mental block that I didn't realize for a long time. I had a mental block. I started suddenly coming out of races, just being like, not crashing, just like, oh, I'm not going to make that next gate, and skiing out. And I had this, and it took me like 3 months to realize like, oh, I'm skiing out because I'm scared. And I'd never had that feeling where I was scared of ski racing before because I'd never had anything bad happen. Like I'd messed up races and been slow, but I hadn't had anything really bad happen to me. So that took me quite a while to get past. I think I probably lent on that too much. For years I was like, if this hadn't happened, and I always kept that in the back of my head. And even though I did manage to reach the same level again, and then I improved and I had better Europa Cup results, there was always, then in my head, I was like, oh, well, I've missed the Olympic pathway because I was injured. And then my comeback season was during the qualification period. So I missed those Olympics. And then when the next Olympic cycle came around and I kind of reached that level again, unfortunately, at the British Championships, I broke my leg. So that happened. And then my next comebacks, and so the comeback season for that was the next Olympic qualification. So I missed that one as well. And then I did my second knee. And yeah, it all kind of, that wasn't my intention to stop because I was injured. But in the season where I decided like I'm ready to move on, I did my second knee. And then actually 2 weeks later, COVID hit and everything got shut down anyway. But yeah.
The world ended afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness, what a journey, and just so much that you've been through there, Cara. And just to kind of hit some of those key points that you brought up that way. First off, I love the experience that you outlined in relation to the rehab you had in the UK that way. I think the interdisciplinary approach of just bringing everyone together, strength and conditioning, physio, psychology, everything together, and just bringing a whole team around you and considering how can we best provide for you and how can we all kind of work together in your best interest that way. I wish that was the standard practice for all athletes, because I think that really helps set you up for success and gives you things that maybe you didn't necessarily know you needed in the time. Now, that's not to say that it always gets everything that's needed. As you mentioned, you kind of had this kind of like yip type sensation afterwards when you started to return to the snow that way. And I think that that's very normal. That's something that I hear from a lot of people who have gone through, extensive injuries and rehab processes is they get worried about what happens if they injure it again, or they get worried when they start to go back to sport for the first time, because, that's probably the longest you were away from sport, from skiing that way. So I think it's normal to be nervous about those things and apprehensive about those things. And I don't think that's discussed enough that way. Obviously, there's things that we can do from a rehab standpoint to help reduce that, right? Like we can help you progress back and maybe work in some different on snow drills to your rehab that way. We talked about that earlier this year with Reagan, who's the PT for Michaela Schifrin, right? Like we talked about some of those on snow drills, like skiing with your boots unbuckled or holding your poles out in front of you to, force your body to remain kind of more neutral that way in relation to how you rotate back and forth. But, ultimately it takes a lot of work on your end to work through that. Was there anything in particular that you remember doing that really helped you work through that kind of mental apprehension that you had when you were returning to snow following the first ACL?
Yeah, I think well, the thing that immediately jumps to my mind was, I guess one thing that was really hard was that as soon as I was back on snow, actually that whole team that I had supporting me through rehab, they were gone because they were the rehab team. And unfortunately, they were based in the UK. None of them left to go with the athletes that they'd done rehab for because they assumed that your sport would then have the facilities that you need. So I was back skiing and I was having, the physical stuff I was physically fitter than I had been. So that wasn't an issue. I didn't really have any knee pain. I didn't really have any swelling. So physically I was fine. And I remember I had a strength and conditioning coach who was a guy called Alain, because he was French. And I remember he was always so supportive of me. And he said to me, like, he would come up and he'd watch the racing and he could just see that I was so fed up that I was slow. And he said to me one day, he was like, look, Cara, you can either sort of get it together and try and be fast again, or you can accept that this is the speed you're going to ski at for the rest of your life and you're not going to progress from here. And I think that clicked the competitive side in me. Because like, as much as I love skiing, I loved ski racing because I loved winning. So for me, that just saying that worked. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to be this slow forever. And it was kind of like, Cara, get it together. You can ski fast. And when I was skiing, I would picture my turn as I was coming into it. And then I would do the turn and I'd be like, no, Cara, that's not what you said you were going to do. And then I'd get to the next turn and I'd be picturing this like sweet, smooth turn with big angulation. And then suddenly I'd chuck my skis sideways to dump my speed. And I just couldn't get past it. And then after he said that, I literally had a race the following weekend where my first run, I did it was a GS, so it was 2 runs. First run, I'm like kind of scrubbing speed, like it's okay, not great. And then the second run, I was so worked up that then I just went out the gate like guns blazing and I did really well. And I had one of my best results. And for me, like it was like reigniting that fire in me, which was something that at the beginning of my career, pre-injury, had actually made me a pretty unpleasant person to be around on race day, because if my first run went badly, I just didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to see my teammates. I didn't want to see my coaches, and they couldn't say anything that wouldn't like warrant a pretty snappy response from me. But because I was so fired up, then I always put that into my skiing, but it didn't make me necessarily a very nice person to be around. And I think I realized that when I was going through rehab, and I was like, I need to find a way to be a better person while also getting fired up about skiing. And I think that's one thing that after my injury, I did manage to balance out better, even though there was definitely a part of me that kind of wished that anger was still there. Cause I was like, I used to ski faster when I was that mad. Even though mentally, I was just completely worn out, because if you're that, you're beating yourself up every day like that, you obviously mentally you're done. And you also, everything for me, I was a good, successful person. Everything relied on me doing well in ski racing. That's why I was like, if I'm good at ski racing, then life is good. If I'm fast, life is good. And if it's not, then it's the end of the world, which is just, I don't race every day of the year, so it's impossible to make your whole personality about that. So yeah, that was like a big thing that I went through in my first rehab.
You put your validation in the skiing outcome.
Yeah.
And if the outcome wasn't to the standard that you had set, the whole day was a wash from there on.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I find a lot of people do that, and I've been guilty of it myself that way. But one of the things I've started to appreciate is we're all going to come up short in any endeavor. You can't get it right 100% of the time, but those times when you don't get it right, or the times you don't get the outcome that you desired, become great learning opportunities that allow you to shift your mindset and perspective and maybe get it right the next time, or solve a problem, or do something even bigger than what you would have, accomplished had you got it right the first time. So I think that sometimes I kind of use that failure as fuel, if you will, to kind of keep persevering forward. And I think that's something that I see a lot with athletes, especially, kind of like what you were saying, if you didn't get the outcome you wanted, you got mad and aggressive and you just went after it tenfold harder. And I think that
Yeah.
when you have that level of passion, you end up finding greatness and you end up excelling in anything that you do in life, which I think is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think it's just always a really thin line between like, being competitive and then especially like since I've moved on from ski racing and you realize that the when people, when you say you used to be an athlete, I think when you say that to people that have never been athletes, they see pictures or videos of you skiing and they're like, oh wow, that's so cool. Or like if they are skiers themselves, they'll be like, oh yeah, like I love when I go out skiing and I arc a really cool turn. And I actually love that about skiing, that it's a sport that all levels can do. You don't have to be doing it competitively. And I think that's what makes ski racing very popular, is that so many people go on ski vacations every year. So they kind of get it. I think what they don't see is like it's all the little marginal gain things, whether that be physically or mentally or like with your equipment and things that you have to push yourself through as an athlete to do, to succeed. And so I've often, every single time I've ever applied for a job or gone for anything where I have to talk about myself after being an athlete, I always try and really big up that part of me, because it's like, it's not the same as rolling out of bed to go to your 9 to 5. It's like, if you treat it like a 9 to 5, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think that's the same across all sports. There's this little bit of extra, like you have to really, really want it, which maybe if you're like, I don't know, a really successful businessman or a businesswoman, maybe that's there as well, but it's part of being the top of something that you do, rather than just being content with like going along with life at the same pace. There has to be that constant like want to do better, and you're willing to do anything to get better.
As you were talking and just thinking about kind of what we've talked about in the past in relation to your injuries, I realized that your second ACL was very unique as well. And that, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were actually, not under anesthesia, not put to sleep for that
No.
procedure, correct? Like I don't meet many people that go through an ACL procedure that way, without being knocked out that way. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that second ACL, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it was really interesting. For my first ACL, I went to the UK for surgery. My mum had knee issues. She unfortunately tore her ACLs years and years ago before the surgery existed. So she always had knee issues. So she had some very good surgeons in the UK that she knew, and she wanted me to go to those surgeons. And so then I went through with the surgery in the UK. That wasn't a bad, surgery. I had an excellent surgeon. But then for the like I mentioned before, in the UK, they make you wait 3 weeks for the surgery. Whereas actually in the rest of Europe, I don't know what they do in the States, but in the rest of Europe, they don't. They want to get you in for surgery as fast as possible. So for my second one, I was like, I don't want to do the whole 3 week waiting thing again. And my physio, who didn't come with me when I was skiing, but I would see whenever I was back home, where I grew up in Italy is like 15 minutes from the Swiss border. And he was in Switzerland. His name's Luca. He was amazing. He was actually with me from when I was 15 all the way up until I stopped skiing at 28. So, but he recommended a surgeon that did all the Swiss athletes' knees. And you kind of want a surgeon that does athletes, just because then they push you forward for like, they push you forward for the correct rehab and the correct physios. And when they're having the conversation with you, obviously an ACL is a big deal to anyone, but surgeons tend to be very like, we're going to cut you here, we're going to sew you up, you're going to be fine, life will continue. Whereas I found that when you have surgeons that are dealing with athletes, they understand that like their dreams have just been shattered, and so they're usually quite good at dealing with that. But yeah, so I did the second surgery in Switzerland. I remember my physio came to the hospital with me, and they were talking through, and he was like, but yeah, you'll be awake and it'll be fine. And I was like, what do you mean I'll be awake? And he was like, well, yeah, it only takes like an hour. And I was like, yes. And I'd like to be asleep for that. And he was like, no, don't be silly. Like, there's no point doing that anesthetic, like if you don't need it. And I was like, okay. And so, yeah, I got given, and this is how they always do it in Switzerland, because they're like, what is the point of putting someone to sleep for an hour operation? It makes them really groggy. There's much higher risks with doing that. And so they gave me an epidural, exactly the same as you get if you're having a baby. Which wasn't painful at all. Just a very weird sensation, because I was kind of numb from like my chest all the way down to my feet. And Yeah. And then you go in for surgery. And I said to them, look, I actually don't really want to hear anything. So they put up a sheet so that you can't see what's going on. I actually think if I'd asked if I wanted to see, they would have been fine with it. But yeah, they put up a sheet so you can't see. And they gave me some headphones and put some music on. And then I still had an anesthetist with me. So in case anything happened, and obviously he was probably watching my heart rate and things. And there were definitely points at which like I was a little bit I kind of realized that I'd fallen asleep for a couple of minutes and then came back. So obviously he was watching my heart rate. And if it started to go up or whatever, he would give me something that made me a little bit groggy and then I would come back. But I mean, there was no pain whatsoever. I'm sure, like, you know, as I said, like, I'm sure with women that have babies, they probably get this sensation of like somebody's rummaging around inside of you. Like that's what it feels like, which sounds really gross, but you can't feel anything. So yeah. And then they finished the surgery in like 45 minutes. And then I got wheeled back out and got taken. I remember I had to go from my bed, my like the operating bed back to my hospital bed. And because I was awake, they put like the handle there that you grab to like move across the bed. And I was wide awake. So I was completely like, I forgot that half my body was numb. So I like went to drag myself across the bed and they were like, wait, wait, wait. And I like looked back and like my legs are obviously still lying on the other bed because I'd forgotten that like they're not going to move with me. But yeah, and it was great. There was no grogginess afterwards or anything like that. Even though I actually thought the first time I had the anesthetic, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I just went to sleep and then my knee was fixed. But yeah, I wasn't groggy. They actually kept me in hospital for 5 days. Afterwards, they wouldn't let me leave hospital until I could bend my knee to 90 degrees, which in the UK, I had the surgery in the evening. I was at the hospital the next day. And that was in the private medical in the UK. That wasn't in the national health. But yeah, in Switzerland, they were so on it. I was so impressed with the care that they gave, just in terms of making sure it wasn't just like you've done your surgery, off you go. They were in there however many times a day. I had this machine that like moved my knee to 90 degrees, obviously little by little, so that there was no swelling buildup. And the physio that came to see me, normally hospital physios are usually like, oh, do you know how to walk on crutches? This is how you go up and down stairs, and here's a couple of exercises that'll be helpful. Whereas this physio came in and had a chat to me, realized that I was an athlete, and was like, okay, these are the exercises that you should do. And they were much more advanced than the exercises I was being given in the UK. So yeah, I was really impressed with all their care that they did there. But yeah, being awake was fun. And then the surgeon came in after the operation and he was like, gave me like a USB stick and he was like, here's the video of your operation. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, it's for your insurance, but we thought you might like it anyway. So I have the video of it, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you got to watch a movie of your surgery and you
Yeah.
got to be awake throughout it as well.
Yeah.
That's such an incredible experience that way. And again, I don't meet a whole lot of people that get those opportunities. Now, I realize, as we mentioned earlier, that you've kind of transitioned to this life in the sun, if you will, in the BVIs that way. Tell me a little bit more about what brought you down there and how you got interested in sailing and all the incredible things that you do down in the BVIs.
It sounds like my dad in the 80s worked as an accountant around South America and the Caribbean, and he grew up sailing with his dad. So basically, he was given a budget by his company that he could for food and hotels while he was traveling, and it was made so you could have nice meals and stay in nice hotels. But what he would do is he'd go and stay in like the worst hotel possible and eat very average food so he could save up all his money, and then he would come to the BVI and go sailing whenever he had a couple of days off, and he loved it here. So in 2001 he really wanted to bring me and my mum here, so we came here on vacation for a week sailing in the BVI. And then I mean, I thought it was just the most incredible place, and my mum said that first trip I said one day I want to live here. And the and then like 3 months later, I was very fortunate. My dad said, you know, let's do this as our family vacations, and he bought a boat here. And we put it, because we skied in the winter, and the winter is the high season here. It made sense that we would put it into a charter fleet, so it would get rented out all winter, and then in summer it would, when we would go and use it. So we did that, and we put it with Horizon Yacht Charters. It was before the days really of the internet and things. So somehow my dad found them, picked up the phone, spoke to Andrew, who's still the current owner, and decided to put a boat with them for 20 years. So yeah, and then I always came here. And then I think as I was kind of getting to the end of my ski racing career, I just started thinking about what am I going to do next. And I went to this sailing academy in the UK called UKSA. It's on the Isle of Wight in Cowes. And I just went there to do a week of windsurfing and a week of dinghy sailing for fun. But I met all these people there that had never been on boats, but were training to be skippers. And I was like, oh, I didn't think I had enough experience to do that, but maybe I could. And so then I just started studying for it while I was still skiing. And when I had a break, I would go and do my courses. And then I did my Yacht Master offshore in 2021. It all got a bit delayed for COVID. And then, yeah, moved out here, got a job with Horizon Yacht Charters, who my parents had a boat with. So at that point, we'd had a boat with them for like 20 years. So I always say it was like the longest job interview ever. And yeah, and then got my American sailing instructor license as well. And spent the next 3 years every day of the week out on a different sailing boat, either teaching people to sail or being their skipper, showing them around the BVI. And we have like 45 different boats, all different sizes, monohulls and catamarans. So whatever people wanted to learn to sail on or have their vacation on, I was out there with them.
That's incredible. Again, I love that shift from snow to sunshine. And it sounds like that was something that was kind of always in the works for you, even from a young age that way. And I'm sure you get to kind of do things beyond sailing too, and just kind of live every day on the water, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the best things about moving to the BVI. I mean, it's not the easiest place to live. You know, we have no shipping because we don't have home addresses. Like I live on Skelton Hill and I'm the white building with the red roof. So like that's my address. Yeah, there's no like fast food chains on this island. If you want something and it's not on island, like sorry, you just can't have it. But the perks are if you're okay with all that and you love water sports, sailing, I do a lot of kite surfing, wing foiling, wakeboarding, snorkeling, scuba diving, like literally all of that is just on your doorstep. So if you want to take advantage of those things, it's the most amazing place to live. And like my commute to work every day, now that I work land based, I'm not out on charter every day. I just wanted to move to a job where I was coming home to my own bed every night. So now I'm working as the operations manager for that same charter company. I just drive along the waterfront for 10 minutes and that's me at my office. This is really cruel. I can show you my view from my house. This is the view out my front door.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, there's nothing quite like that.
Yeah. So it's like every day I get to wake up to that. And obviously the mountains are an incredible view too, but this was a very welcome change.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that is such an incredible view and an incredible kind of life that you get to live that way every single day. And I realize that we've talked so much about kind of the past and the present, but I also think we should bring up the future that way, because I know you've been doing so much incredible work. And I've told some of the female athletes that I work with in clinic that way that, you know, you have your own swimwear line and they just think it's the coolest thing ever and everyone wants to meet you. So tell me a little bit more about kind of your entrepreneurial spirit and all the other amazing things that you do outside of the adventurous, active life that you live.
So in 2017, I started up my own bikini line called Carolina Swim. I was still skiing at that time. It was actually the year after I did my first knee. So I think the idea must have come to me when I was in rehab and I had a little bit more time on my hands. And it was something completely different from skiing that I was like, I want to have a couple of hours in the day to think about something different. And I don't know why I thought I would produce bikinis and then I'd be able to sell them. I don't know why that was the thought process, but I mean, I had no design background, no business background. And yeah, it was a huge learning experience. I loved it. I designed all my own prints and then I would just draw them on paper. And I'm not particularly like artsy at all, but I was like, I would think this would look cute on a bikini. And then I found a design student in India who she would make them into like a repeatable pattern for me so it could be printed. And it's extremely close to my original design. And then I found a factory in Italy where coincidentally right by where I live, and they started producing them for me. And yeah, suddenly then I had like 400 bikinis sitting in my house and I was like, what do I do now? So it was a huge learning curve and I really enjoyed it. And then when I moved here to the BVI, that opened up some more opportunities because I could actually go and speak to shops that were interested in stocking bikinis. So I stocked them here and then I just thought, I don't think I really want to make any more bikinis. It's an extremely difficult market. So many people in the last 10 years have started up bikini companies. And so I thought, my prints I actually thought would work really well for kids. So I've started making some rash guards and some swim shorts that have sold really well here. And so now I'm trying to expand that, and I'm going to make some little sun hats and some little baby suits. And yeah, I really enjoy drawing the prints. And then I think this is probably a little bit like, I've always loved selling things, I guess. I guess it's the making money bit. But even as a kid, I had like a little, I lived right next to a school, like a local Italian school, and I would set up a stand on my front door with like my old toys that I would clean up and then sell them to the kids coming out of school. I just always loved doing that. So I think it probably feeds into that. It's not, and when we have Christmas markets here and things, I love doing that. I don't love the online stuff, like all the online sales and the social media. I don't really have the creativity for that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, it's great. And it's very time consuming, and it's what, like anything, the more time you put in, the more you get out. So if I had, if it was my full-time job, it would probably be a lot more successful. But it is something that I really enjoy doing alongside my current job. Keeps me busy.
Yeah, for sure. I love that consistent entrepreneurial spirit. And I find that a lot of times the athletic background leads to success in business as well. So it's so cool that you're able to kind of find success and find what you were after on both fronts that way. And I realize we could probably continue this conversation all day long because you're such an incredible individual doing so many amazing things. Is there anything that we missed that you want to bring up real quick, or any other kind of closing thoughts based on what we discussed today?
No, I just think I was going to say, it's funny. So you found me through, I was back skiing in Europe a few months ago, and I made this little skiing video about like how to spot the ex ski racer out on the slopes. And for some reason, it went viral. It's got like 1 million views, which is so weird that all those people have watched me. Cause like I literally got my dad to film that video for me. My dad's 70, so, and, but it was funny, after I did that one, I made this little video that I posted on TikTok, and it was like things that I wish I knew while I was still ski racing. And it was just like a little collection of thoughts of like things that I wish I had believed while I was still racing. And so I just think that like anyone who's out there that is still, whether it's ski racing or some other sport, I'm like, stop beating yourself up. Like, it is okay to have those bad days. It doesn't make you a bad athlete. It doesn't make you a bad person. Just enjoy it, because when it ends, it's really hard to replicate like how good that feels. So just enjoy like as much of it as you can.
That's great advice. I love that. And for people who want to find out more about you there, Cara, online and all that way, where can they find you at?
So I'm most active on my Instagram because I'm a millennial, I'm a Gen Z. And my Instagram is Cara the Skipper. So Cara the Skipper. It used to be Cara the Skier, and then I've changed it now that I live here. So it's evolved. But yeah, that's where people can find me. And I always love hearing from people. So, and whether you'd like to talk about ski racing, or you want to find out more about the BVI and learning to sail and making that happen, yeah, I'd love to hear from people.
Awesome. We'll link to all of that in addition to your swimwear line as well in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and keep up to date with all the amazing things that Cara is up to. This is amazing. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for everything.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been great. Thank you.